The stenographer actually stopped typing. That is how loud the laughter was. Inside Superior Courtroom 4B, Marcus Vance, the CEO of Vance Global, threw his head back and cackled while his high-priced legal team smirked. His wife, Lakota, stood alone at the plaintiff's table, wearing a thrift store blazer, looking small and defeated. She had just told the judge she would be representing herself against the most ruthless legal sharks in New York City. They thought she was a joke. They thought she was just the trophy wife coming for a paycheck. But they didn't know that for the last 6 months, Lakota hadn't been sleeping. She had been reading. And inside the manila folder resting under her trembling hand lay a single piece of paper that would not only silence Marcus's laughter, but threaten to tear his entire empire to the ground. This is the story of the day the courtroom gasped. The end of the marriage didn't start with a scream or a thrown vase. It started with a calendar notification. It was June 14th, 2023. Lakota Vance sat in the sunroom of their sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The house was a marvel of modern architecture. Glass walls, steel beams, and cold, echoing marble floors. It was valued at $14.5 million, and Lakota felt like a trespasser in every square inch of it. Her phone buzzed on the glass table. Meeting with Julian Thorne, 4:04 p.m. She frowned. She didn't have a meeting with Julian Thorne. She knew the name, of course. Julian Thorne was the pit bull of Manhattan divorce law. He was the man billionaires called when they wanted to ensure their ex-wives were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Before she could process the notification, the front door slammed. Marcus Vance walked in. He was 45, handsome in a way that felt manufactured, perfect teeth, tailored Italian suit, and eyes that assessed everything like an asset to be liquidated. He was the CEO of Vance Global, a logistics conglomerate that moved everything from crude oil to microchips. Marcus, Lakota stood up, smoothing her skirt. "You're home early." He didn't look at her. He walked to the liquor cabinet and poured a scotch. "Pack a bag, Lakota. You're going to the condo in the city tonight." "What? Why?" He turned, taking a sip, his face bored. "Because I filed the papers this morning. I'm divorcing you, Lakota. It's done." Lakota felt the blood drain from her face. "Divorce?" "Marcus, we just had dinner with your parents yesterday. We were talking about a summer vacation." "I was acting," he said dryly. "Look, let's not make this messy. The prenup you signed 10 years ago is ironclad. You get the lump sum of $500,000, you keep the jewelry I bought you, and you get out. No alimony. No shares in the company. Clause 4. Section B." Lakota gripped the edge of the table. 10 years, Marcus. I gave up my career in data analysis to manage this house, to host your investors, to raise your reputation. I supported you when Vance Global was nothing but a failing trucking company. Marcus laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "You arranged flowers, Lakota. You ordered catering. Don't pretend you were a partner. You were an accessory. And frankly, you've gone out of style. I need someone fresher, someone who understands the modern world." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and tossed it onto the glass table. It slid across the surface and stopped inches from her hand. "Julian Thorne is representing me," Marcus said, checking his watch. "Don't bother hiring a big firm. I've already conflicted out the top 10 firms in the city. Just sign the papers, take the check, and go be a yoga instructor or whatever it is women like you do." He walked out. He didn't even look back. Lakota stood in the silent, expensive house. She looked at the envelope. She opened it. The legal jargon was dense, but the message was clear. You are nothing. You get nothing. You leave now. Marcus had made one critical error. He had believed his own press. He believed Lakota was just the trophy he had molded her into. He had forgotten that before she was Mrs. Vance, Lakota was Lakota Rostova, a scholarship student at MIT who graduated summa cum laude in forensic accounting. She hadn't used those skills in a decade, but as she looked at the signature on the divorce papers, arrogant and sweeping, she felt something cold harden in her chest. She didn't pack a bag. She went to the basement, to the server room where the smart home backups were stored. 3 months later, the pre-trial hearing was a disaster. Marcus had been true to his word. Every top lawyer Lakota called told her the same thing. "Sorry, Mrs. Vance, we've already consulted with Mr. Vance. We can't take your case." It was a classic dirty trick, conflicting out the competition. She ended up with a strip mall lawyer named Gary, who smelled of stale tobacco and seemed terrified of Julian Thorne. "You should take the deal," Gary whispered to her in the hallway of the New York County Supreme Court. "They're offering $600,000 now. It's a good offer, Lakota. If we go to trial, Thorne will destroy you. The prenup is solid." "The prenup was signed under duress," Lakota said, her voice steady. "And the financial disclosures Marcus provided are incomplete." Gary wiped sweat from his forehead. "Incomplete how? They gave us 5,000 pages of documents." "Exactly," Lakota said. "They're drowning us in paper to hide the needle. I need you to subpoena the records for a shell company called Orion Holdings." Gary shook his head. "We can't just go fishing. Thorne will file a motion for sanctions. Just take the money, Lakota." Lakota looked at Gary. She saw a man who was beaten before he even stepped into the ring. She looked across the hall. Marcus was laughing with a tall, blonde woman, his new assistant, presumably, while Julian Thorne adjusted his silk tie. They looked untouchable. "You're fired, Gary," Lakota said. Gary blinked. "Excuse me?" "You're fired. Go home. You can't fire me 10 minutes before the docket call. Who is going to represent you?" Lakota picked up her heavy leather briefcase. It was old, scuffed, and filled with 3 months of sleepless nights, red-lined spreadsheets, and printed emails. "I am," she said. When the bailiff called, "Vance versus Vance," the courtroom was packed. It was a high-profile split. Gossip columnists were in the back row. Marcus Vance was a minor celebrity in the business world, and everyone wanted to see the takedown of his gold digger wife. Judge Anthony Miller sat on the bench. He was an old-school judge, known for having zero patience for theatrics. "Appearances," Judge Miller grunted. Julian Thorne stood up, his suit costing more than most people's cars. "Julian Thorne, for the plaintiff, Marcus Vance. We are ready to proceed, Your Honor." Gary was gone. Lakota stood up. She wore a simple navy blazer and grey slacks. She looked like a librarian, not a socialite. "Lakota Vance, defendant," she said clearly. "Representing myself. Pro se." The silence in the room was instant. Then it happened. Marcus, sitting beside Julian, let out a loud, incredulous snort. He covered his mouth, but the laughter bubbled up. "She's what?" he whispered loudly enough for the microphone to catch it. "She thinks this is an episode of Law and Order?" Julian Thorne smiled, a shark baring its teeth. "Your Honor, with all due respect, Mrs. Vance has no legal training. This is a complex case involving significant assets and intellectual property. We would ask the court to appoint a guardian or delay until she finds counsel. We don't want to take advantage of her ignorance." "I don't need a delay, Your Honor," Lakota said. Her voice didn't shake. "And Mr. Thorne need not worry about my ignorance. I am ready to proceed today." Judge Miller peered over his glasses. "Mrs. Vance, pro se representation in a high-asset divorce is highly inadvisable. You will be held to the same standards as a member of the bar. I will not cut you any slack." "I understand, Your Honor." "Very well," the judge sighed, looking at the clock. "Mr. Thorne, give your opening statement." Julian Thorne was a master orator. He painted a picture of Marcus as a hard-working, self-made American hero who had been burdened by a lazy, spending-obsessed wife. "Lakota Vance signed a contract," Thorne boomed, pacing the floor. "She agreed that what was his remained his. Now she seeks to rewrite history because she is greedy. We will show that Marcus Vance's assets are entirely separate property, protected by law, and that Mrs. Vance's claims are nothing more than extortion." Marcus looked smug. He winked at the blonde woman in the back row. Then it was Lakota's turn. She walked to the podium. She didn't have flashcards. She didn't pace. She placed a single sheet of paper on the stand. "Your Honor," Lakota began. Her voice was lower than Thorne's, forcing the room to lean in to hear her. "Mr. Thorne is right about one thing. I signed a contract. I signed a prenup that protected the assets of Vance Logistics as they existed 10 years ago." She paused and looked directly at Marcus. For the first time, Marcus stopped smiling. "But we are not here to discuss Vance Logistics," Lakota continued. "We are here to discuss the entity that actually holds the wealth, an entity that was created 3 days after our wedding, specifically to bypass the prenuptial agreement's accrual clause." She turned to the jury box. Though this was a bench trial, the gesture was for the audience. "Mr. Thorne called me greedy. He called me lazy. But for the last 10 years, while my husband was the face of the company, I was the one managing the private servers in our basement. I wasn't just arranging flowers, Your Honor. I was the unlisted system administrator for the Vance Family Trust." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Julian Thorne frowned and scribbled a note to Marcus. Marcus shook his head vigorously, looking annoyed. "I intend to prove," Lakota said, her voice sharpening like a blade, "that Marcus Vance has committed perjury on his financial disclosure forms. He claims a net worth of $20 million. I will present evidence that the true figure is closer to $400 million, hidden in a network of offshore shell companies that he thought his trophy wife was too stupid to find." "Objection," Thorne shot up. "This is prejudicial. Opening statements are for outlining facts, not wild conspiracy theories." "Sustained on the tone," Judge Miller said, but his eyes were narrowed. He was looking at Lakota with new interest. "Stick to what you can prove, Mrs. Vance." "I will, Your Honor," Lakota said. "I will prove that the plaintiff is not the owner of Vance Global. He is merely an employee of a Cayman Islands corporation called Blue Heron, of which I am the co-signatory." Gasps. The sound actually ripped through the courtroom. Marcus's face went from annoyed to ash-white in a single second. He lunged toward his lawyer, whispering frantically, "She can't know that! That's impossible!" "Order!" Judge Miller banged his gavel. "Mrs. Vance, are you claiming you are a legal owner of the offshore entity?" "I am claiming, Your Honor, that because my husband needed a U.S. citizen with a clean record to set up the blind trust, he used my passport and my social security number to do it, forging my signature on the incorporation documents. But," Lakota smiled, a cold, terrifying smile, "he forgot to remove my access to the digital banking keys." She held up a small black USB drive. "It's all here, every transaction, every bribe, every mistress paid off with company funds. And since my name is on the account, Your Honor, this isn't stolen evidence. It's my bank statement." Marcus Vance wasn't laughing anymore. He looked like he was about to vomit. Julian Thorne stood up slowly, his shark-like demeanor gone. He looked at his client with the eyes of a man realizing he had been sent into a minefield without a map. "Your Honor," Thorne stammered, "we request a brief recess." "Denied," Judge Miller said, leaning back in his chair. "You wish to proceed quickly, Mr. Thorne. Call your first witness." The courtroom air conditioning hummed, but Marcus Vance was sweating. He sat in the witness stand, adjusting his silk tie for the third time. Julian Thorne, his lawyer, had just finished a softball examination. He had asked Marcus about his tireless dedication to the company, his generosity in paying for the house expenses, and how Lakota had abandoned her duties as a wife. Marcus had answered smoothly, charming the court reporter, and even getting a nod from the judge. "Your witness?" Thorne said, sitting down with a smug look. He whispered something to his junior associate, who giggled. They still thought the blue heron comment was a bluff. They thought Lakota had found one piece of paper and was trying to scare them. Lakota stood up. She didn't walk to the podium this time. She walked to the center of the room, standing directly in front of the witness box. "Mr. Vance," Lakota began, her voice polite. "You stated earlier that you built Vance Global from the ground up, correct?" "That is correct," Marcus said, leaning into the microphone, his voice deep and practiced. "Blood, sweat, and tears. And during the last 10 years of our marriage, you stated that I contributed nothing to the business. Is that also correct?" "Financially, yes. You hosted parties, Lakota. You didn't negotiate contracts. So, you would say you are the sole decision-maker for all financial matters regarding Vance Global and its subsidiaries?" Julian Thorne's head snapped up. He sensed the trap. "Objection." Vague. "Overruled," Judge Miller said, watching Lakota closely. "Answer the question." "Yes," Marcus said, looking annoyed. "I make the decisions." Lakota walked back to her table and picked up a document. It wasn't the USB drive this time. It was a glossy photograph. "Mr. Vance, do you recognize this location?" She handed the photo to the bailiff, who passed it to Marcus. Marcus looked at it. "Yes, that is the Villa d'Este in Lake Como, Italy. I attended a logistics conference there in July 2022. "A conference," Lakota repeated. "And who did you go with?" "I went alone. It was business." Lakota picked up another piece of paper. "I have here an invoice from the hotel. It lists the occupants of the royal suite as Mr. Marcus Vance and Mrs. Lakota Vance." Marcus laughed, waving a hand. "A clerical error. I probably booked it for both of us, hoping you would come, but you, as usual, were too busy with your Pilates classes." "Is that so?" Lakota's eyes flashed. "Because on that same date, July 14th, 2022, my passport shows I was in Greenwich, Connecticut, recovering from the surgery you didn't attend." The courtroom went quiet. "However," Lakota continued, "I also have a credit card receipt for a flight booked on the company card, a first-class ticket for a Ms. Isabella cruise." Marcus froze. His eyes darted to the back of the room, where the blonde woman, Isabella, was sitting. She suddenly looked very interested in her fingernails. "Isabella is my executive assistant," Marcus stammered. "She organizes my schedule." "Does she?" Lakota turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit C. These are chat logs from the company's internal messaging server, the server I maintained." She read from the paper. "July 14th, 2022. Message from Marcus to Isabella. Don't worry about the wife. She thinks I'm at a board meeting in Chicago. Pack the red dress. We're going to spend the company's Q3 bonus on champagne." A collective "ooh" went through the gallery. Julian Thorne jumped up. "Objection, hearsay, and invasion of privacy. Those are private communications." "They are communications on a company server," Lakota countered instantly. A company where I am a co-signatory on the master account. There is no expectation of privacy from the system administrator." Judge Miller hid a smile behind his hand. "Overruled. The evidence is admitted." Lakota turned back to Marcus. He was no longer leaning back. He was gripping the railing of the witness stand so hard his knuckles were white. "So, Mr. Vance," Lakota said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "you used company funds, shareholder money, to take your mistress on a vacation and lied about it to the court just now. That is perjury, but that's not the big twist, is it?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus hissed. "You said you make all the financial decisions," Lakota said. "So, tell me, who authorized the transfer of $4.2 million from the Vance Global Operational Fund to an account in the Seychelles under the name Red Dress LLC on July 15th, 2022. Marcus's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Was it you?" Lakota pressed. "Or was it Isabella?" Because if it was you, it's embezzlement," Lakota said, pacing like a tiger. "But if it was Isabella, and you didn't know about it, then you aren't the genius CEO you claim to be. You're just a man being robbed by his mistress." The courtroom was electric. Lakota had put him in a double bind. Either he admitted to a crime, or he admitted to being a fool. Marcus looked at Isabella. Isabella looked at Marcus, and for the first time, the united front of the power couple cracked. "It was a consulting fee," Marcus blurted out. "Isabella provides consulting services." "For $4.2 million, Judge Miller interrupted, his eyebrows raised so high they touched his hairline. "For a weekend in Italy?" "She is a high-level consultant," Marcus yelled, losing his cool. "This is irrelevant. This is a divorce trial, not a corporate audit." "Actually," Lakota said, walking back to her table and picking up a thick stack of stapled papers, "it is a corporate audit now. Because, Your Honor, since the plaintiff has admitted that Red Dress LLC is a legitimate business expense, I would like to introduce the incorporation papers for Red Dress LLC." She slammed the papers on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "The sole owner of Red Dress LLC is not Isabella Cruz," Lakota said. "It is Marcus Vance." She looked at her husband with pity. "You were laundering money from your own company, Marcus. You were stealing from your investors to hide money from me in the divorce. And you named the shell company after the dress you bought your mistress." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the stenographer stopped to look up. Marcus Vance slumped in his chair. The mask of the powerful CEO had slipped completely. He looked small, greasy, and trapped. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Miller said, his voice icy, "I suggest you control your client. If I hear one more lie in my courtroom, I will have him taken into custody for contempt." Thorne looked pale. He nodded jerkily. "Yes, Your Honor." "I have no further questions for this witness," Lakota said, and she sat down. As she sat, she felt a tremor go through her hands. She hid them under the table. She had landed the first major blow. But she knew Marcus. He was a narcissist. And when a narcissist is cornered, they don't surrender. They attack. The lunch recess was a frenzy. As soon as the doors opened, reporters swarmed the hallway. Lakota stayed inside the courtroom, eating an apple she had brought from home. She watched Julian Thorne and Marcus Vance arguing in the corner. Marcus was waving his arms. Thorne was rubbing his temples. At 1:00 p.m., the court reconvened. Thorne looked like he had aged 10 years in 1 hour. He stood up. "Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Mr. Robert Gelson to the stand." Lakota frowned. She scanned her notes. Robert Gelson. The name was familiar. A short, balding man in a grey suit walked in. He looked nervous. He carried a heavy briefcase. "Mr. Gelson," Thorne said, trying to regain his confidence, "please state your occupation." "I am a notary public and a document verification specialist," Gelson squeaked. "And do you recognize the defendant, Lakota Vance?" Gelson looked at Lakota. He squinted. "Yes, I believe so." "Mr. Gelson, were you present on June 14th, 2013, when the prenuptial agreement was signed?" "I was." "And did you witness Mrs. Vance sign the document freely and without duress?" "I did." Thorne smiled. This was his counterattack. He was trying to pivot back to the prenup, to make all the financial fraud irrelevant. If the prenup held, Lakota got nothing, regardless of how much money Marcus had stolen. "And," Thorne continued, pulling a document from his folder, "did you also notarize this document? The waiver of spousal interest in offshore assets, dated 2018. Lakota's blood ran cold. She had never heard of such a document. Gelson took the paper. He adjusted his glasses. "Yes, that is my stamp, and that is Mrs. Vance's signature." Thorne turned to the gallery. "There you have it, Your Honor. Mrs. Vance claims she is a co-signatory on the accounts, but in 2018, she signed a waiver giving up all rights to Blue Heron and any other international entities in exchange for, let's see, a one-time payment of $10,000. Thorne dropped the paper on Lakota's desk. Lakota stared at it. It was her signature. The loops, the slant, it was perfect. But she knew she had never signed it. In 2018, she was in the hospital with pneumonia for 2 weeks. She hadn't signed anything. "Your witness," Thorne said, looking triumphant. Lakota stood up. Her legs felt heavy. This was the twist she hadn't seen coming. A forged document, authenticated by a corrupt notary. If this stood, her entire case collapsed. She walked up to Gelson. "Mr. Gelson," she said, "you say I signed this in 2018? "Yes, ma'am." "Where were we when I signed it?" Gelson hesitated. He looked at Marcus. Marcus gave a tiny, imperceptible nod. "We were at Mr. Vance's office in Manhattan," Gelson said. "It was around 2 p.m., and I was there physically." "Yes, of course," Lakota nodded slowly. She walked back to her table. She needed to think. She dug through her mental archives. 2018, pneumonia, Mount Sinai Hospital. "Your Honor," Lakota said. "May I approach the witness with a calendar?" "Proceed." Lakota handed Gelson a calendar. "Mr. Gelson, what date is on that document?" "October 12th, 2018. "And you are certain I was in Manhattan?" "Absolutely. I remember you wore a red scarf." Lakota smiled. It was a sad smile. "That's a nice detail, Mr. Gelson. But there is a problem." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, on October 12th, 2018, I was in a medically induced coma at Mount Sinai Hospital." The courtroom gasped again. "Objection!" Thorne shouted. "She's testifying." "I have the medical records right here," Lakota said, pulling a certified file from her briefcase. "Admitted October 10th, discharged October 25th, intubated from the 11th to the 15th. Unless I walked out of the ICU, traveled to Manhattan, signed this document, and walked back to put the ventilator back down my throat. Mr. Gelson is lying." She slammed the medical file down in front of Gelson. "Who paid you?" Lakota asked, her voice ringing out like a bell. Gelson began to shake. He looked at the medical records. He looked at the judge, whose face was thunderous. I... "Did Marcus Vance pay you to forge my signature?" Lakota demanded, stepping closer. He told me it was just a formality," Gelson cried out, cracking under the pressure. "He said you were busy. He brought me the document with the signature already on it. He just told me to stamp it. I didn't know you were in a coma." "So you notarized a signature you didn't witness?" Judge Miller asked, his voice low and terrifying. "He paid me $5,000, Gelson blubbered. "I needed the money. I'm sorry." Pandemonium broke out. Marcus Vance jumped up. "He's lying! This man is a liar!" "Sit down, Mr. Vance," the bailiff shouted, moving toward him. Judge Miller banged his gavel so hard the wooden handle cracked. "Order! Order in this court!" When the noise subsided, Judge Miller glared at the witness, then at the plaintiff's table. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, "your witness just admitted to fraud and forgery on the stand, implicating your client." Thorne was staring at his desk. He closed his folder. He knew it was over. But it wasn't just over. It was a disaster. "I reserve my rights, Your Honor," Thorne whispered. "Mr. Gelson," the judge said, "you are not leaving this building. Bailiff, take Mr. Gelson into custody for perjury and fraud. I will be referring this to the district attorney immediately." As the bailiff handcuffed the weeping notary, Lakota looked at Marcus. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the exit. But Lakota wasn't done. She had dismantled the prenup. She had exposed the forgery. She had proven the money laundering. But there was one more thing. The thing that would hurt Marcus more than losing his money. She was going to take his reputation. "Your Honor," Lakota said, her voice steady amidst the chaos. "Since the waiver is proven to be a forgery, and the prenup is now invalidated due to fraudulent financial disclosure, I would like to move to the next phase of my argument, the equitable distribution of assets." "Go on," Judge Miller said, leaning forward. "I am not asking for half," Lakota said. Marcus looked up, confusion in his eyes. "Not half? I am asking for full ownership of Vance Global." The room went silent. "On what grounds?" the judge asked. "On the grounds that the initial capital used to start the company 10 years ago didn't come from Marcus," Lakota said. "It came from an inheritance I received from my grandmother in Russia, an inheritance Marcus swore he invested in safe bonds, but actually used to buy his first fleet of trucks. I have the bank transfer records from 2013. She held up the final document, the ace she had kept up her sleeve. "The company isn't marital property, Your Honor," Lakota said softly. "Technically, I bought it. He just works there." Marcus's face turned a color that didn't seem human. It was a mix of purple and gray. He clutched his chest. You bitch!" he screamed, lunging across the table. The bailiff tackled him before he got 3 steps. The great CEO, the man who laughed at his wife, was pressed face down into the carpet of the courtroom, handcuffed, while his wife stood above him, holding the papers that proved he was nothing but a fraud. But the story didn't end there. Because as Marcus was dragged out, screaming threats, Lakota caught the eye of Isabella, the mistress. Isabella wasn't looking at Marcus. She was looking at Lakota, and she looked terrified. Because Isabella knew something Lakota didn't. The money in the Seychelles wasn't just tax evasion. It was something much darker. And by exposing it, Lakota had just put a target on her own back. The gavel had banged, but the nightmare wasn't over. It was just changing shape. 2 hours after the bailiff dragged Marcus out of the courtroom, Lakota sat in a small, windowless interview room in the back of the courthouse. She wasn't with her divorce lawyer. She was sitting across from 2 men in dark suits who had flashed badges that didn't say NYPD. They said FBI. "Mrs. Vance," the older agent, Agent Miller, said. He looked tired. "You did a hell of a job out there. You uncovered a fraud scheme that we've been trying to crack for 2 years." Lakota took a sip of lukewarm water. Her adrenaline was crashing, leaving her shaking. "I just wanted my fair share, Agent. I didn't know about the rest." "We know," the agent said, "but you stepped on a landmine. Red Dress LLC isn't just a shell company for your husband's mistresses. It's a pass-through entity for the Sinaloa cartel. Lakota froze, the plastic cup crushed in her hand. The cartel? Your husband, Marcus Vance, wasn't just moving microchips, the agent explained, sliding a folder across the metal table. Vance Global Logistics trucks were being used to move product across the border. He was washing their money through the Seychelles account. That $4.2 million you found? That was a down payment for a shipment of fentanyl. Lakota felt sick. She thought she was married to a narcissist and a cheater. She hadn't realized she was married to a monster. "Why are you telling me this?" Lakota asked, her voice trembling. "Because the people Marcus was working for, they don't care about divorce courts," Agent Miller said gravely. "They care about their money. You exposed the account. You have the digital keys. That makes you a target." "I need protection," Lakota whispered. "We can put you in protective custody," the agent said. "But we need one more thing. You have the USB drive with the banking keys. We need you to unlock the account so we can trace the downstream beneficiaries. If we do this, we can take down the whole network. If we don't, they will come looking for you." Lakota looked at the USB drive sitting on the table. It was the evidence that had won her freedom. Now, it was a grenade. Before she could answer, the door opened. A police officer poked his head in. "Agent? There's a woman outside. She says she has information. Says her name is Isabella Cruz." Isabella. The mistress. "Let her in," Lakota said suddenly. The agents looked at each other, then nodded. Isabella walked in. She looked nothing like the confident woman in the courtroom. Her mascara was running, her designer dress was rumpled, and she was shaking violently. She looked at Lakota, and for the first time, there was no rivalry. Only shared terror. "They called me," Isabella sobbed, collapsing into a chair. "They called me 10 minutes ago. They think I have the codes because my name is on the flight manifests. They said if I don't transfer the money back by midnight." She couldn't finish the sentence. Lakota stood up. She looked at the pathetic woman who had helped destroy her marriage. She should have hated her. But Lakota saw the truth. Isabella was just another disposable object to Marcus, another shield he had used to protect himself. "Agent Miller," Lakota said, her voice hardening into steel, "I will give you the keys. I will decrypt the entire ledger. But I have conditions." "We don't really do conditions, Mrs. Vance." "You do if you want the encryption password," Lakota said, crossing her arms. "Condition 1. Isabella gets witness protection." She was a pawn. She didn't know about the drugs. Isabella looked up, eyes wide with shock. "Lakota, why?" "Because he used us both," Lakota said coldly, "and I won't let him claim another victim." "Condition 2?" the agent asked, impressed. "Condition 2, Lakota said. "I want to be the one to tell Marcus it's over." The agents exchanged a look. Done. For the next 6 hours, Lakota Vance didn't look like a divorcee. She looked like the MIT graduate she was. She sat at a terminal, fingers flying across the keyboard, dismantling the complex firewall Marcus had paid millions to build. She traced the shell companies, exposed the laundering nodes, and handed the FBI a roadmap to the entire criminal organization. By midnight, the accounts were frozen. The threat was neutralized. But the final act was yet to come. The steel doors of the Rikers Island Visitation Center slammed shut with a sound that vibrated in Lakota's chest. It was a heavy, final sound, the sound of a life ending. But for Lakota, it was the sound of a new one beginning. It had been 90 days since the verdict. 90 days since the FBI raided the Vance Global headquarters on Fifth Avenue. 90 days since the name Marcus Vance went from being synonymous with American success to being the punchline of late-night talk show monologues. Lakota stood in the sterile grey hallway, checking her reflection in the reinforced glass. She didn't look like the woman who had stood in divorce court wearing a thrift store blazer. Today, she wore a bespoke white suit from Armani, tailored to within an inch of its life. Her hair was cut into a sharp, asymmetrical bob that screamed authority. She wasn't just a visitor. She was the executioner coming to deliver the final blow. But before she could face Marcus, she had to remember the battle she had already won earlier that morning. The memory was still fresh, the adrenaline still humming in her veins. The boardroom coup 4 hours earlier. The conference room at Vance Global smelled of stale coffee and fear. 12 men sat around the mahogany table. These were the board of directors, the old guard. They were men who had played golf with Marcus, men who had looked the other way when the accounting numbers didn't add up, provided their dividends kept coming. At the head of the table sat Richard Sterling, the chairman of the board. He was 60, red-faced, and currently looking at Lakota like she was a waitress who had gotten his order wrong. "Mrs. Vance," Sterling said, his voice dripping with condescension, "we appreciate you coming in. We understand you have ownership claims based on the divorce settlement. But let's be realistic. The DOJ is breathing down our necks. The stock has plummeted 80%. We are filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy tomorrow. We're liquidating." Lakota didn't sit down. She stood at the end of the table, her hands resting on the leather chair that used to belong to Marcus. "There will be no bankruptcy, Richard," Lakota said calmly. Sterling laughed. It was a nervous sound. "Lakota, dear, you're a lovely woman, and you did a spirited job in court. But this is corporate restructuring. It's not a kitchen table budget. The government fines alone are $200 million. The company is dead." "The company is dead if you run it," Lakota corrected. "But the DOJ isn't going to liquidate us." She signaled to the back of the room. The doors opened and Agent Miller walked in, flanked by 2 junior prosecutors. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Gentlemen," Lakota said, gesturing to the federal agents, "I spent the last 3 months cooperating with the Southern District of New York. I decrypted the Seychelles servers. I recovered $400 million in laundered assets that Marcus hid from you, the shareholders." Sterling went pale. You gave them the keys?" "I made a deal," Lakota continued, her voice sharpening. "The government has agreed to a deferred prosecution agreement. Vance Global stays in business. The 5,000 truckers, warehouse workers, and dispatchers keep their jobs. The fines will be paid from the recovered offshore accounts." That's impossible," Sterling stammered. "The DOJ never settles on a RICO case. They do when the new CEO provides them with the entire list of cartel contacts and agrees to install federal oversight monitors in every shipping hub," Lakota said. "Which I did." "The new CEO?" Sterling stood up, his face turning purple. "Now see here, Lakota, you don't have the experience. You're a data analyst, for God's sake. The board will never vote you in." Lakota smiled. It was a terrifying smile. She pulled a thick binder from her bag and slid it down the long table. It spun and stopped perfectly in front of Sterling. "That binder contains the emails you sent to Marcus in 2019, Richard," Lakota said softly. "The ones where you asked why the shipping costs for Red Dress LLC were so high. And Marcus told you to buy a new boat and stop asking questions. And you did. You bought a Sunseeker Predator 60. I have the receipt." Silence descended on the room. It was heavy, suffocating silence. "That is willful blindness, Richard," Lakota said. "It makes you an accessory. Agent Miller is very interested in accessories. Unless, of course, the company is under new, responsible management that purges the old corruption." She leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. So here is how this goes. You are going to resign, effective immediately, along with Greg, Simon, and Arthur. The rest of you will vote to appoint me as chairwoman and CEO, or you can leave this room in handcuffs. Lakota looked at her watch. I have a meeting at Rikers Island in 2 hours. I'd like the vote to be finished before I leave. Sterling looked at the binder. He looked at the FBI agent, who was idly tapping his handcuffs against his belt. Then he looked at Lakota. He saw no mercy in her eyes. Slowly, painfully, Richard Sterling sat down. I move to appoint Lakota Vance as CEO, he whispered. The cage, present time. The memory faded as the heavy steel door buzzed open. Visitor, booth 4, the guard grunted. Lakota walked into the visitation room. It was divided by a thick sheet of plexiglass, scratched and yellowed by years of desperate conversations. On the other side sat Marcus Vance. The transformation was shocking. The man who had worn $5,000 Italian suits was now draped in a baggy orange jumpsuit that washed out his complexion. His hair, once perfectly coiffed with expensive gel, was shaved close to his scalp, revealing a jagged scar Lakota had never seen before. He looked smaller, shrunken, but his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, narcissistic. He picked up the phone receiver. Lakota did the same. You look expensive, Marcus said. His voice was raspy, stripped of its smooth, corporate polish. Spending my money well? My money, Lakota corrected effortlessly. It was always my money, Marcus. You just held on to it for a while. Marcus sneered, leaning closer to the glass. You think you've won, don't you? You think because you got a judge to sign a piece of paper, you're safe? I don't think I'm safe, Marcus. I know I am. You have no idea what you've done, Marcus hissed, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for spies. The people I worked with, the cartel, they don't forgive. You exposed their accounts. You think they won't come for you? Lakota laughed. It was a genuine, light-hearted sound that seemed to confuse him. You really don't get it, do you? You were the middleman, Marcus. You were the liability. When I unlocked the accounts for the FBI, I didn't just give them the money. I gave them the communication logs where you were skimming off the top of their shipments. Marcus froze. His mouth opened slightly. That's right, Lakota whispered. I showed the Sinaloa representatives, through a back channel, that you were the one stealing from them. That $4.2 million wasn't just hidden from me. It was hidden from them. You were skimming 10% of their product value. Marcus went white. The blood drained from his face so fast, he looked like a corpse. You told them? I had to clear my name, Lakota shrugged. I let them know that the glitch in the accounts was caused by a greedy CEO. They were actually quite grateful for the audit. They aren't looking for me, Marcus. But I hear the Aryan Brotherhood in Cell Block D has a new contract out. Good luck with that. Marcus dropped the phone. It dangled by its metal cord, swinging back and forth. He stared at her through the glass, realizing for the first time the sheer magnitude of his mistake. He hadn't just underestimated her legal skills. He had underestimated her ruthlessness. He had created a monster, and now it was eating him alive. He fumbled for the phone, his hands shaking. Lakota! Lakota! Please! You have to help me. I can testify against them. I can get into witness protection. Call Agent Miller. Tell him I want to deal. Agent Miller isn't interested, Lakota said coolly. I already gave him everything you knew. You have no cards left to play, Marcus. The deck is empty. I am your husband, he screamed, the sound muffled by the glass but still audible. I made you. You were nothing but a scholarship student with bad shoes until I picked you up. "And now I'm the woman who owns the company you built," Lakota replied. "Speaking of which, I brought you something." She reached into her sleek briefcase and pulled out a glossy magazine. It was the latest issue of Forbes. She pressed it against the glass. On the cover was Lakota. She was standing in front of a fleet of trucks, arms crossed, looking powerful and visionary, but it was the headline that made Marcus's eyes bulge. "The Phoenix of Logistics: How Lakota Rostova Saved an Empire from Corruption." "Rostova?" Marcus choked out. "You changed the name?" "Vance Global is gone," Lakota said, savoring every syllable. "I rebranded this morning. We tore the sign down from the building at 9 a.m. It's Rostova Logistics now. I used my maiden name, the name my grandmother gave me, the name of the woman whose inheritance you stole to start this whole mess." "You can't do that," Marcus whispered, tears of rage pooling in his eyes. "That's my name. That's my legacy." "Your legacy is a federal indictment number, Marcus. Your legacy is a cautionary tale they teach in business ethics classes. My legacy is the future." She stood up. The movement was graceful, final. "I won't be visiting again," Lakota said. "I have a board meeting to run, and tonight I have a date." "A date?" Marcus looked bewildered. "Yes, with a very nice forensic accountant named David. He loves numbers as much as I do, and the best part? He buys his own dinner." "Lakota, don't you walk away from me! Lakota!" Marcus began to pound on the glass. The guards rushed forward, grabbing him by the shoulders. He struggled, screaming her name, screaming threats, screaming pleas. Lakota didn't look back. Not once. She walked out of the visitation room, the sound of his screams fading into the background noise of the prison, just another echo in a building full of regrets. The aftermath outside. The air was crisp and smelled of the ocean. The sun was setting over the New York skyline, painting the city in hues of gold and violet. Lakota walked to the waiting black Mercedes Maybach. Her driver, a burly man named Silas, who used to be a Navy SEAL, a necessary expense given her new profile, opened the door. "How did it go, Miss Rostova?" Silas asked. "It's finished, Silas," she said, sliding into the leather seat. "Take me to the office." As the car merged onto the bridge, Lakota's phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message. She opened it. It was a photo, a selfie. It showed a woman with dyed brown hair, wearing scrubs, standing in front of a nursing college in Montana. It was Isabella. She looked tired, stripped of her glamour, but she looked alive. She looked free. The caption read, "Got my acceptance letter today. I start Monday. I don't know how to thank you. I promise I won't waste this second chance." Lakota typed back, "Just be the person you were meant to be before he found you." She deleted the thread. The car glided into the city. Lakota opened her laptop. The screen illuminated her face. Spreadsheets, projections, profit margins. The stock for Rostova Logistics was up 12% in after-hours trading following the announcement of the management change. She looked at the reflection in the window. She saw the girl who had been told she was just a trophy. She saw the wife who had been laughed at in a courtroom. And she saw the CEO who had conquered them all. Marcus had once told her that the world was a game of sharks and minnows. He was right. He just never bothered to check if the minnow had learned how to bite back. Lakota closed the laptop, leaned her head back, and watched the city lights blur by. For the first time in 10 years, she wasn't calculating a way to survive. She was calculating what to conquer next. And that is how Lakota Vance turned a humiliating divorce into a total victory. She didn't just win a settlement, she dismantled a criminal empire and took back her own identity. It's a powerful reminder that silence isn't weakness, and intelligence is the most dangerous weapon you can bring to a fight. Marcus Vance learned the hard way that you should never underestimate the person who knows your passwords. What would you have done in Lakota's shoes? Would you have saved Isabella or let her go down with the ship? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. We post new dramas every single day. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.